would say some good news coming in from IMF, especially in terms of the entire outlook for Asia. Why IMF does state that they do see some green shoots emerging in the Asia economy. They're stating that economic activity is beginning to revive, starting with China, and the economic contraction in the rest of the Asia appears to have bottomed out in the second quarter of 2020, and the drop in the activity in the second quarter was particularly sharp in India, Philippines, as well as in Malaysia. In fact, in their entire global growth outlook as well, IMF has revised the 2020 forecast to minus 4.4%, and they do see global growth at 5.2% in 2021. For the entire Asia economy, which is the Asia and Pacific region, IMF does see economy to contract minus 2.2% in 2020. This is higher decline than they had anticipated earlier, and that is on account of the sharper slump that we have seen in India, Philippines and Malaysia. However, they do believe that Asia economy is likely to grow at 6.9% in 2021, which would be the thanks to the boost coming in especially from stronger recoveries in China. In fact, just specifically for India, IMF states that India is going to grow at the sharpest or strongest pace in the entire Asia Pacific region, especially in the advanced economies and the emerging markets, growing at nearly around 8.8% in 2021, while of course India again is going to see a sharper slump in growth in 2020 at minus 10.3%. IMF also states that if you look at China, China is expected to expand by nearly around 1.9% in 2020, and China is seen growing at a slower pace than India. In 2021, China growth is seen at 8.2% versus an 8.8% for India. This is for 2021. IMF states that the economic activity is beginning to revive, starting with China, and after hitting a trough in February 2020, China growth revived as a boost from infrastructure, real estate investments, as well as the surge in exports. Having said that, IMF also shares that 2020 would be remembered as the most severe contraction in generations, and Asia is not alone suffering. The whole world is in together, and there is multi-speed recovery across the Asia economies, and we have a lot of lessons to learn from Asia. In fact, IMF also states that various countries, the pandemic is at various stages across Asia and the Pacific regions, and many countries have successfully contained the first wave of virus. Although there is second wave emerging in some of the countries like Australia, Japan, as well as Myanmar. Some of the countries like India, Indonesia and Philippines, they state that these countries are still striving to flatten the pandemic curve. IMF also believes that there are still considerable risks in terms of the overall growth recovery. First is the resurgence of the pandemic cannot be ruled out. Second, geopolitical tensions, particularly in US, China, may derail the recovery. Third, rise in social unrest, which would be triggered by as the pandemic has had disproportionate impact on the poorest and the most vulnerable. And fourth is the return of tighter financial conditions. A return to risk aversion financial markets could add to balance sheet vulnerabilities. IMF also states that of course there are upside risks, and which is that the prospects of an early large-scale rollout of an effective vaccine could create some upside risk. IMF also believes that of course there's a need for policy support. They state that with the pandemic seemingly far from over, policy support should be sustained, and in some cases it should also be increased. They believe that strong healthcare and containment measures are vital until the pandemic has abated. They also believe that targeted fiscal spending is needed until the recovery is entrenched. The fiscal spending should be aimed at the most vulnerable, where fiscal multipliers are highest, and to job-oriented, inclusive and green investment. They believe that credible fiscal plans will be the key to secure debt sustainably. Monetary policy should also remain supportive according to IMF, as elevated credit risk demands continual monitoring, especially where debt level is high. And of course, they believe that overall the policy support should be sustained, and in some cases it should be increased. But I would say that yes, certainly some green shoots emerging in Asia. Growth has bottomed out according to IMF. IMF in the second quarter for the entire Asia region, and India, although would see a very sharp decline in 2020, it is also likely to grow at a faster pace than the rest of the Asian and the emerging Asian economies.